Hey friends, welcome to today's free live training inside the Freedom Warriors Facebook group. Welcome, welcome. Hope everyone is having a great week so far. So far off to a good start. Fingers crossed. What we are going to talk about today is signs, very specific signs that you are dealing with a pathological narcissist. If you are new to me, I'll take a quick moment to introduce myself properly. My name is Tamie M. I am an empowerment life coach who specializes in codependency and narcissistic abuse recovery. And you can find out all about that at TamieMCoaching.com if you're interested in finding out about services and programs and free offerings and all the good things. So currently we're running a free training series on all things codependency and narcissistic abuse recovery related, specific for beginners. So every Monday for the month of February at 5 p.m. Eastern, brain space there, 5 p.m. Eastern, and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for the month of February. That is our schedule. I'm going live inside the Freedom Warriors group, doing a free live training, again, all things related to codependency and narcissistic abuse recovery, specifically for beginners. Hey Karen, how are you? Nice to see you. Thanks for hopping on. Welcome, welcome. So signs that you're dealing with a pathological narcissist. That's what we're diving into today. Now, in previous trainings, we talked about the fact that these are never black or white issues, right? These are never black or white issues. There is a spectrum, a sliding scale when we are talking about things like narcissism, codependency, and even empathy for those of you who identify as being an empath. Whenever we're talking about these issues, they're not just yes or no, like I'm pregnant or I'm not pregnant, fully black or white. There's this whole spectrum where an individual can land based on behaviors and attitudes, etc. And we can determine what we're dealing with quite easily based on our own personal experience of an individual's consistent, predictable behavior and attitudes, and certainly the effects that has on us, right? So again, when we're talking about narcissism, codependency in particular, there are all kinds of traits, all kinds of behavior patterns that tend to, make up the personality. Let's call it that for now, the personality. And depending on where they are on the spectrum, they may be more high-end, more low-end, and depending on the individual, they might have, of the personality traits that they may manifest more acutely in certain areas with some individuals and more acutely in other areas with other individuals. So it's really important that we get a good grasp of the entire conversation because it's not always just super straightforward and simple. Now, my aim with today's training is to give you a really detailed list in terms of what you'd be looking for to help you determine whether or not you're dealing with someone who's more high-end. When we are talking about a pathological narcissist or a malignant narcissism, we're talking about people who land more serious, severe, more high on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, right? You don't have to be a doctor of psychiatry to figure out whether or not that's what you're dealing with, right? Like, it's not because you're not a psychiatrist that you can't determine that you're dealing with someone who has given you enough information based on their behavior and their attitudes that they land on the spectrum at the very least, if not high end, depending on what you're dealing with. Now, we're going to dive into this deep dive list here today to help you figure this out in more detail. But in short, if you are interested in really figuring out what it is that you're dealing with any particular individual in your area, it could be your husband, your wife, your adult child, your mother, your father, your boss, your colleague, your neighbor, your friend, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle, whoever it is, it doesn't matter who it is. If you want to really get a good feel based on your own personal experience as to whether you're dealing dealing with someone with mild, moderate, serious, severe, like where they are on the spectrum, go on into the files section inside the Freedom Warriors Facebook group. Go on into the files section. There's a quiz there that you can download where you answer a series of questions based on your own personal experience, and then you tally up the score, and that will give you a really good read as to how severe the destructive narcissism is that you're dealing with any individual. But for the purpose of today's training, I am going to run a list with you of 34 classic and identifiable signs and behaviors of a pathological narcissist. So high spectrum. Let me just grab a sip of water here before we dive in. 34 classic and identifiable signs and behaviors. Now here's the thing. Hey Beth, how are you? Thanks for hopping on. Love, nice to see you. Here's the thing with regards to this list. They don't have to have them all. I would say that there's 34 that we're going to run through. Make a note each time, like the individual that is really challenging in your life. Each time I say something that is like, yeah, that's a definite yes, just make a little note and add it up. At the end, I would say if you get to 10 or more, chances are good you're dealing with someone who's high spectrum. If they have even a third of what I'm about to run through in terms of signs and identifiable behaviors and attitudes that you have been observing, if there's even a third off of this list that are a match to what you're experiencing, you're probably dealing with someone who is more high spectrum. But again, you can go into the files section, run the quiz, which is a very powerful tool for a whole bunch of reasons, not least of which to give you some definitive answers based on your own personal experience. But run the quiz and you'll get a very definitive idea. So let's dive in. Signs of the classic identifiable, I'm having a hard time with that word today for some reason, a bit of a mouthful. Classic identifiable signs and behaviors of the pathological narcissist. They are, first and foremost, have a grandiose sense of their own self-importance. They are grandiose. They need constant attention and admiration. In overt ways and in covert ways, they are seeking attention, admiration, being the center of attention, or even in a covert way seeking to get attention, positive or negative, it doesn't matter. Attention is attention. It is a source of supply. They exhibit a lack of empathy, a lack of conscience. Unlike the vast majority of you who tune into me, who tend to be high empathy people, who need codependency recovery, these people are empathy deficient. How empathy deficient depends on where they land on that spectrum of destructive narcissism. So the higher we travel down that spectrum into high-end destructive narcissism, the less empathy these folks have, all the way into psychopathy, sociopathy, where there is an absolute lack of conscience. Like they just don't have the conscience. In other words, the effects of their attitudes and behavior on you or anyone else doesn't register on the radar for them. Guilt, shame, not something that they are consciously aware of, or they don't moderate their behavior, their reality based on a conscience, a sense of empathy. They rarely take responsibility for their mistakes, and they blame others, no matter what we're talking about. And I'll give you an example from our own life that was just, even for me, like, right? No matter what, they are going to be the villain or they are going to be the victim or the hero, but never the villain. So we have someone I believe lands rather high end on the destructive narcissism rating scale in our life, who was called out a while back for the ways in which she targets one particular young person in our lives. We didn't call her out, someone else did, but she was called out. And her grandchild, quite frankly, her grandchild, she was called out on her behavior and attitudes towards this kid, really, this child, right? And her response was, well, she doesn't make me feel very special. Classic, high-end, destructive narcissism. Not only the behavior of targeting a child consistently for a long time, as long as she can get away with it, but when called out, the blame is put on the child, right? Classic high-end destructive narcissism. Appalling the way these people behave and think. And, you know, even worse when they're allowed to get away with it, right? They don't respond to much other than consequences. Just to finish that little story, interestingly enough, once called out, we have observed a shift, right? So once you shine a light on the behavior, the response may not be very positive in terms of what's coming back, but when they realize that people are onto them and not going to put up with it, and that there may very well be some, you know, pretty serious consequences if there isn't a shift or a change, they might change depending on the consequences and the individual. In this particular instance, we noticed a shift. Doesn't change the fact that we're dealing with someone who's a high spectrum destructive narcissist. From a distance, real small doses. They don't respect authority or laws. They are a law unto themselves. They have zero respect for authority, laws, boundaries, rules, regulations, etc. They are entitled. They have a shocking sense of entitlement and feel superior to others, need to one-up everyone. Know anyone like that who's always looking down their nose, right? Expressing contempt and disdain on the regular because they're so superior, they're so better at. They have to one-up everyone. They make friends too easily, and or they may not have any long-term friends. So this to me is, you know, a classic sign when I'm, you know, newly acquainted to someone. And I learned this actually a long time ago because I observed my very narcissistic stepmother was very much this way in terms of a lack of boundaries. Overly familiar, super close, trying to bond like immediately with anyone, like the neighbor, the friend, the whoever, the anyone, right? So this isn't just about your romantic life, right? Like this goes on across the board. But, you know, making friends like so easily, like just right in there as if like we've known one another, you know, like no boundaries. But if you observe their lives long term, they can't hang on to friends. Like the notion of having friends since childhood, like there may be some people they know from a distance, but actual genuine friendship that lasts a lifetime or decades, they are not capable of it. They are not capable of it. There could potentially, you know, be a small handful, and typically that little circle. And I mean, they could have lots of acquaintances, right? That's not the same thing. I'm talking about friends, right? That small circle is probably just as narcissistic as they are. One might be more overt, the other might be more covert, and then we get into the whole, you know, flying monkey, minion, enabling nonsense that goes on between, you know, the overt narcissist and the covert narcissist, who often, you know, they hang out in little clusters together. They begin relationships with a bang of intense romance, then strange behaviors set in. In my experience, takes no time at all. Takes no time at all. Our job is to tell ourselves the truth about what we're seeing, thinking, feeling, hearing, observing, all of it, right? That's where the whole codependency recovery thing comes in, to get to a place where we're not so starved for love, attention, validation, approval, all the good things, that we're ignoring the red flags because we've, you know, been on the receiving end of the love bombing for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but usually more like weeks. And then when the strange behaviors start, we want the good stuff, so we ignore bizarre. We need to not be doing that in any area of our lives, romantically and otherwise, you know. Again, an example from my own life, out walking Nelson on the regular, start chatting with one of our neighbors, and thought over a period of, you know, a little bit of time, our dogs loved each other. It looked like we might, you know, have a new budding friendship happening, and all of a sudden, real strange behavior, the signs, and, you know, given 15 years of solid recovery in what I do for a living, I cannot ignore the signs. I cannot. And it's really unfortunate, you know. There could have been a really nice friendship there, and we're not on bad terms, but I definitely, when I started to see the signs, backed away and kept some distance there. This is not someone that I invite into my home for tea where I otherwise might have, right? Or, you know, text so that we can get the dogs together for play dates where I otherwise might have, right? Okay, where were we? Are charming to the outside world and erratic and abusive behind closed doors. Ever so charming, ever so charming. And, you know, don't beat yourself up if you're duped by the charm. I was duped last year really well, quite frankly. I mean, it took a couple of months for me to really put together what the hell was going on, but I was duped last year. At that time, 14 years into my recovery journey, and I work as a life coach in this space. I didn't beat up on myself, and the reason being, I can't remember where I read it, but at some point in my education, I was taught that, listen, even the most highly skilled clinical psychologists specializing in these issues, they don't all specialize in these issues. So if you're looking for a therapist, make sure you find one who does specialize. But point being, even the most highly trained, experienced, and skilled clinical psychologists can be duped initially by the charm and the performance. These people are master freaking manipulators. Typically very charming to the outside world, really good at putting on a performance, so much so often everyone thinks that they are just the bee's knees in so many ways. Meanwhile, erratic, chaotic, abusive, vile, behind closed doors to those closest to them. And that's what's one of the most painful things if you grew up with narcissistic parents or step parents or caretakers or your spouse, or, you know, like, that's what's so freaking painful. Going out into the world and being Mr. or Ms. Wonderful, and a whole other story at home. They easily share their expectations of you, but never ask your expectations of them. You're not allowed to have any expectations of them. You're not allowed to have any feelings, expectations, standards. You're not allowed to have any of those. But they'll tell you all about what you are and are not allowed to do and say, and who you should be, and who you can spend time with, and on it goes. Constantly raise the bar in expectation of you and what they expect from you. Constant shifting, moving targets. Constant. No matter how much you do, it is never enough. You're constantly dancing. No matter how much you do, it's never enough. They love to watch you dance and perform like a puppet on strings. So the target is always being moving. It is a constant moving target, and the bar rather is always being raised. Very toxic and unhealthy behavior in a relationship. They don't fight fair. They stop speaking to you or they leave. There's no such thing as a fair fight. They will say whatever it takes, no matter how untrue, no matter how cruel, no matter how bizarre. They will say whatever it takes to prove their point, be right, make you wrong, get their way. There is no line in the sand that they won't cross. They'll go as low as they need to and sling whatever it takes to hurt you, especially if you're making sense, especially if you're figuring them out, especially if you're onto them, right? They'll do it to you, and then they'll go and, you know, the whole smear campaign ensues. When they perceive criticism, they rage or they go silent. And you know, that can even just be like, I've inflicted narcissistic injury without even, you know, by saying hello, my name is Tamie and nice to meet you, and sticking out my head. And the individual I was dealing with clearly had, you know, because a whole other story, but we can just be walking through life doing the most normal things as reasonably healthy, high-functioning adults, and whatever's going on in their distorted perception of reality, if you show them up in any way and you inflict narcissistic injury, look out, look out. Anything even remotely perceived as criticism is going to be met with rage, passive-aggressive silence. And if that's what's going on, make no mistake, it's coming at you another way. It's coming at you another way. They need to win at all costs. At all costs. You are not dealing with someone who, again, is playing fair, right? This is not a level playing field. So when you are enmeshed with someone who is a destructive narcissist, in particular more on the high end of the spectrum, they will do and say things that you would never even consider. So you need to know that. It's never going to be a fair fight. They will go to lengths that you could never even fathom going to. You couldn't even come up with this stuff in your own mind. I had experiences with my biological mother like that. It was like, wow, what has to be going on? I'm a teenager and I'm thinking to myself, what has to be going on in your mind that's the stuff coming out of your mouth? Like what it's, right? It's a whole other level of not being on a level playing field. I promise you, if you're taking them on, you are outmatched before you begin, simply because they are willing to go to any lengths to get their way, to hurt you, to retaliate, to control the situation, to control you. There is no limit, right? And we enter these dynamics assuming that we're dealing with people who think and feel the way that we do, and that is our first mistake. That is our first mistake. They don't think and feel the way that we do. They don't have a conscience and empathy moderating their behavior. You know, we can get mad. I don't know about you, but I can get pissed and I can shout and I can say some things. I mean, it's very rare today that I would have lack the self-control and say something that I regret. But I'm a human being. Provoked enough, I can get mad. I can, but I have a conscience and empathy that moderates that, right? There's only, even in the worst case scenario, so far that I could ever go. That's not what you're dealing with when you're dealing with someone who is on the spectrum of, high on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. There is no limit. And then we stand back shocked, right? Know in advance. Which is why I counsel my clients to, there's a time when you need to communicate clearly, and there's a time when you need to keep your mouth shut and just be smart with your mouth shut and do what you need to do to take care of you. Having the last word, winning the right fight, you're never going to win the right fight with these people, and getting the last word is not going to serve you. It's not going to serve you. So if you have a hard time keeping your mouth shut, I had someone say to me last week, I can't keep my mouth shut, and therefore I'm always on the receiving end of narcissistic injury and the rage and the all of that. Learn to keep your freaking mouth shut. Learn, practice, try. You can do it. You can do it. And I promise you, as you devote time to the real work of healing and recovery, it gets easier. Where my self-esteem was 15 years ago at the beginning of my journey and where it is today are two different people, right? And because my self-esteem is where it is right now, and my sense of self-respect and my personal integrity and the extent to which I value my peace of heart and my peace of mind, I just don't go there. Have a history of failed relationships due to lying or cheating. have a history of failed relationships due to lying or cheating. Now, some of you will go, but I have a history of failed relationships. Yeah, probably because you haven't done your own healing and recovery work, and you're a codependent empath who is like a moth to flame to a destructive narcissist. That is not the same thing. Having a history of failed relationships because people get tired of your noxious and toxic attitudes and behavior is a whole other thing. It's a whole other thing, right? And, you know, don't forget that when they're telling you about their history of past relationships, they're going to be either the victim or the hero in those situations, always. They're not going to come clean and tell you how much they lied and they cheated, right? In fact, they'll probably tell you that the other people were lying and cheating, because projection is a whole great big huge part of this phenomena, right? So yeah, pay attention. Pay attention. They lie about small things, even when it doesn't matter, even when it doesn't serve them, even when it would just be just as easy to tell the truth. They lie. How do you know that a destructive narcissist is lying? Their lips are moving. They make impulsive, life-altering decisions without any regard to how it affects them or the family. Man, I could go into this one. You know, the narcissistic father who, you know, I will give you an example. Like, there's so many, but I'll give you an example. My father, alcoholic narcissist, gives my kid brother a truck for his 17th birthday, but doesn't actually sign it over to him because he's got to be in control of everything, and then decides one day to give it to my aunt and uncle instead. So my 17-year-old brother gets this truck, invests a whole bunch of his hard-earned money into fixing it up and cleaning it up and getting it just the way he wanted, only to have it taken away from him. That's just one example of many. But, you know, like the parent who decides to move without, you know, any conversation with the kids. There's so many examples we could go into around this, but just, you know, suffice to say, making impulsive, life-altering decisions without any regard, zero regard for how it affects anybody else. Often display an obvious and distinguishable smirk on their face, like they walk around with smug, especially if they have succeeded in making you look bad or feel small, right? You see someone with smug on their face? That's a clue. That's a clue. People with empathy and healthy self-esteem and humility, they don't need to walk around with a smirk and smug on their face. They mirror your emotions. They can look concerned but not actually feel it. This is actually one of their survival strategies, because they are empathy deficient and lacking conscience and don't feel the way we feel. In order to travel through life and, you know, society and function to some degree, they just reflect, they mirror back to you. They you know, there's especially in an early dating situation, right? Like there's this mirror effect going on, because they actually don't emote like normal people do. You know, they don't, like the grandma targeting the grandchild, right? Like there's a lack of healthy emoting going on there. Any reasonably healthy grandma would be more concerned for the granddaughter's feelings than her own. Would never even think of saying, well, that child doesn't make me feel very special, right? So, you know, an individual like that, in order to survive, in order to be able to function in social situations and what have you, has to actually put on a performance reflecting back what they see. It's not coming from a genuine place, which is why when you're dealing with people like that, if you're an empath, your body's going cuckoo on you, because your body knows. Your body knows, right? You feel that stuff. We just need to be in touch with and trusting of our own feelings and our own internal guidance system. When you look into their eyes, you cannot actually feel them. It's like dead. There's that, right? Like there's a real disconnect there. They exhibit easily identifiable, repetitive life patterns. Gambling, porn addiction, adventure, thrill seeking, alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual promiscuity, rage cycles, cheating, right? Like identifiable, repetitive patterns in their life that are very unhealthy and destructive for anybody who's close to them. They have a diluted sense of reality, like a completely diluted sense of reality. And the more high spectrum they are, the more disconnected they are from reality. Diluted, fully distorted perception of reality often. They act like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character, you know, and that's what is so freaky and painful for those of us who become fully enmeshed with them, who open our hearts, who open our love, who open our home, who open our bank accounts, you know, our families, etc., right? You're dealing with Dr. Jekyll one moment and Mr. Hyde the next, and the swing is extreme. So if you're in a situation where you never know who's going to show up, my advice to you is love yourself enough to get some distance there, whatever it freaking takes. And I know that's not always easy, and I know it's complicated sometimes because there's children involved and finances and all of it. It doesn't have to happen in a 24-hour period. You can start making the tracks necessary silently to do what you need to do to get some distance there. You do not need to spend the rest of your life walking on eggshells dealing with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because that stuff doesn't go away and it does not get any better. And there is nothing that you can do to put a dent into whether or not that is your experience. There's nothing you can do to change that, right? The abuse cycle. Ideation, love bombing, devalue, which is subtle, insidious, put downs, blame, and then ultimately not so subtle. Discard, disappearing, like ghosting, just drop you like a rock. Triangulation, when you're experiencing triangulation, for example, bringing in the ex or a third party to cause confusion or comparison. These are people who can't just rest on their own opinion. They can't just rest on their own experience of reality and their own opinion and, well, this is how I feel, therefore, etc. They have to gather the troops. They have to bring in well, so-and-so, you know, everybody thinks you're crazy, right? So-and-so thinks this about you. So-and-so says that, right? The gathering of the troops, that is, you know, one of the ways that they triangulate. Gaslighting you when you know you've read it right, but they try to convince you that you've read it wrong, causing you to doubt your reality. And they cause cognitive dissonance. If you are perpetually exposed to one of these individuals, you are torn between believing what you want to believe and what you know is true. So your brain is literally being split, right? Like part of you's going this way and another part of you's going this way, and you're like, cognitive dissonance. You must remove yourself from that type of enmeshed experience in order to be able to heal that. As long as you are in it, you cannot heal in the environment where you got sick. And close proximity to these people will make you very, very sick, usually very quickly and progressively so. So you have to literally extricate yourself from the situation so that that cognitive dissonance starts to subside and you can come back to the truth of who you are, what you know, regardless of what is being said and going on out there. Trauma bonding, attachment dilemma that occurs from narcissistic abuse, betrayal, neglect, lies, silent treatment. Flying monkeys, third party who acts on behalf of a narcissist, usually for a deliberate abusive purpose. These people tend to be rather narcissistic themselves, or they wouldn't even be in the room. And then of course we have the smear campaign. So if you've got someone who, you know, suddenly you're onto them and you're trying to put some distance or break free from the relationship or whatever it is that you're trying to do to take better care of yourself, whether that's effective or not or skillful or not is irrelevant. It's relevant for you, but in terms of them, what happens is when they can no longer control you or your perceptions, they try to control other people's perceptions and how other people see you, think of you, feel about you. So ensues the smear campaign, right? And hoovering, attempt by a narcissist or a sociopath to suck their target or victim back into the relationship, named after the Hoover vacuum cleaner. They literally suck you back in, and this whole cycle is repeated over and over again. And unfortunately, many of you have already been through that. And the antidote to that, my friends, is, you know, like for example, I run Facebook ads for my coaching program. I run an 8-week transformational coaching program for those of you who aren't aware. And so I get like hundreds of comments on these ads, right? And it's fascinating the number of people who say, just leave, just get out, just run away. Well, sure, that's a really great first step, but that's just geography. You know, if that worked, we wouldn't have people getting hoovered back in over and over and over again, repeating the cycle, repeating the patterns, right? There's a whole lot more to breaking this cycle and breaking these patterns than just kicking their ass to the curb. That's a good place to start, you know. Stop the abuse, right? Stop the bleeding, get yourself out of the environment. But if you don't do anything to heal and recover, yes, educate yourself, but even there, you have to take it further. We don't heal on our heads. Information's powerful. It will take you so far. But lots of people with a head full of knowledge come to me saying, I don't understand. I went back. I keep going back. I can't, you know, a big part of that is understanding that we become addicted to these people. There is a biochemical addiction that takes place. There's a wounded inner child who's driving the bus, who needs healing. Like, there's all kinds of aspects to this that really take place below the conscious level. So 95% of the game of life is subconscious. So all of these things come into play that are the reason why geography isn't going to fix it. You'll just attract another one, usually worse, because these issues get worse, not better, left untreated over time. Codependency gets worse, left untreated, gets worse, not better, over time. So stepping into an actual healing and recovery program, whatever that is for you, and you know, listen, if budget is an issue, which I know it can be because many of you have been financially abused, 12-step recovery is very powerful and ever so freaking free and happening every day all over our planet in church basements and community centers all over the globe, right? So that's a really good place to start, a really good place to start. So there's no excuse to not dive into your own healing and recovery journey. If you can do it and hire a therapist who specializes in these issues, hire a coach who specializes in these issues, join a recovery program with proven results that actually works, now you're getting somewhere. Now you're doing the work. You're learning how to heal from codependency and narcissistic abuse, do the inner child healing work that needs to take place, rewire your subconscious mind, your subconscious programming, all the stuff that you picked up in the first 7 years of life, long before you had any choice in the matter. You're learning to tolerate the withdrawal, because that, my friend, is part of the path, as many of you know. We are fully love addicted to these people more often than not, and when they discard us or we break free, we find, you know, we're empowered for a little period of time, and then all of a sudden we're in full-blown codependent amnesia, going through withdrawal, the biochemical withdrawal, and that is painful. And you need the right support system, the right help in order to get yourself through that, the right tools, the right strategies in order to heal that, so you can get to the other side of it healthy, whole, clear, standing in your truth, standing in your power, bulletproof ultimately, so you're no longer susceptible to the bullshit. Does it mean you'll never meet another narcissist again? Absolutely not. I'm 15 years into my recovery. I live on planet Earth and we bump into these people. They're out there. The difference is I'm onto them really quickly and I know exactly how to handle them and how to handle me. And they don't affect me. My life is not negatively affected by their stuff. They can't get to me. Bulletproof. And you can get there too. You can get there too, but it's not going to happen by accident. There's some very specific things that you need to do. If you want some information on some very specific things that could be very helpful for you, I'm going to drop a link in the comments. You can book a free strategy session with me, and one way or another we can point you in the direction of tools that will help. And with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. So thank you, friends, for hopping on. I hope you got some value out of this today. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to drop me a like, maybe some love, drop a comment, let me know what your biggest takeaway was. If you know of anyone who would benefit from these trainings, feel free to invite them to the group. And as always, I will leave you with this. Know your value. Know your value and unlock your freedom. Mwah. Much love. Bye for now.